What you are about to hear is not casual advice. It is not another layer of information stacked on top of everything you have already consumed and partially applied and eventually abandoned when the initial energy faded and the old patterns reasserted themselves. This is a shift in how you walk, how you speak, how you interpret. Every circumstance standing between you and the life you keep telling yourself is still coming. A shift in the operating assumptions that are quietly, invisibly, without your conscious awareness, constructing your reality from the inside out. But before we go any further, a warning. By the end of this session, one of two things will happen. Either you will confront the exact identity that has been sabotaging every serious attempt you have made at building something real, or you will do what you have always done, absorb the insight, feel the temporary clarity, and return to the same patterns that have been producing the same results for longer than you are comfortable admitting. That choice will be yours, not mine. I am not here to change you. I am here to show you the mechanism. The precise, documented, neurologically grounded mechanism by which your current results are being produced, and the equally precise mechanism by which different results can be installed. What you do with that information is entirely your responsibility. Now, the thing most people never grasp until the cost of not knowing it has already been paid in years. Your life bends to your assumptions, not your talent, not your work ethic, not the quality of your plans or the strength of your intentions or the hours you are willing to put in, your assumptions. The default expectations running beneath every conscious decision quietly, automatically, without your permission or awareness, are the actual architects of your reality. Not the visible architects, the invisible ones, the ones whose work is never credited because it is never seen. And right now, at this exact moment, your dominant assumption is either pulling your desired life toward you or silently, efficiently, systematically pushing it away. Most people have never once stopped to honestly examine what that assumption actually is. They wake up every morning bracing for things to go wrong. They rehearse the worst-case scenario before the day has even properly begun. They speak the language of doubt so automatically, so fluently, that they no longer recognize it as a choice. They have confused their conditioned response with their actual nature. They have mistaken a learned pattern for an unchangeable truth about who they are. That confusion is the great illusion, and it is costing you more than you currently have an accurate accounting of. Here is the truth that dismantles it. Belief is not a reaction to circumstances. Belief is a decision made prior to circumstances, and that decision made deliberately, repeated with emotional consistency, installed into the operating layer of your psychology, is the most powerful force available to a human being for shaping the direction of their life. Your subconscious mind does not argue with you. It does not evaluate your assumptions for reasonableness or accuracy. It accepts what you feed it with repetition and emotional charge, and then it organizes your entire perceptual experience of the world around that accepted instruction. This is not philosophy. This is the documented function of the brain's primary filtering architecture. And understanding that architecture precisely, mechanically, without mysticism or abstraction, is where this session begins. By the end of this hour, you will not have been motivated. Motivation fades. You will have been shown the mechanism. And the mechanism, once understood at the operational level, gives you something motivation never can. Leverage. Let us begin. There is a structure in your brainstem, approximately the size of your little finger, that is, right now, determining what you are capable of noticing. It is called the Reticular Activating System, the RAS, and it is the neurological foundation of everything this session covers, the mechanism that explains, with biological precision, why two people can exist in identical circumstances and experience entirely different realities. Here is what it does. At any given moment, your senses are receiving approximately 11 million pieces of information simultaneously. 11 million distinct data points, visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, all arriving at once. Your conscious mind can process approximately 40 of them. 40 out of 11 million. The RAS is the system that decides which 40 make it through, and it does not make that decision randomly. It makes it based on a set of criteria established by your dominant beliefs, your repeated emotional patterns, and most critically, your installed assumptions about what is real, what is possible, and what is relevant to you. Tell the RAS through years of repeated fearful thought that the world is hostile and opportunity is scarce, and it will filter your 11 million incoming data points to surface the 40 that confirm that reality. Every closed door will be noticed. Every setback will be amplified. Every face that seems indifferent will be read as rejection. The confirming evidence for scarcity will be pulled forward into your conscious awareness with remarkable efficiency, while the contradicting evidence, the open doors, the available opportunities, the favorable signals gets filtered out before it ever reaches your attention. This is not pessimism as a personality flaw. It is the RAS executing its installed instruction with perfect precision. Now understand the reverse. Install the assumption that things are working in your favor, that the path is opening, that the outcome you are building toward is not a distant hope, but an approaching reality that you simply have not yet reached. Feed that assumption with repetition and emotional conviction until the subconscious registers it as operational fact. And the same RAS, the exact same neurological infrastructure, begins filtering your 11 million daily data points for the 40 that confirm that reality. The same world, the same circumstances, the same people and environments and available information, filtered differently because the instruction has changed. This is why two people with identical starting conditions produce radically different results over time. It is not luck, it is not talent. It is the accumulated divergence of two filtering systems running on two different instructions, one installed by default, one installed by deliberate choice, producing two increasingly different perceptual realities, which produce two increasingly different behavioral responses, which produce two increasingly different sets of results. The divergence compounds, and it begins entirely, without exception, at the level of the installed assumption. Napoleon Hill observed this operating principle across decades of research without the vocabulary of modern neuroscience. He described it as the law of dominant thought, the principle that whatever mental attitude a person holds most consistently and most emotionally becomes the organizing framework for their experience of reality. He was describing RAS function. The men he studied who built the most durable results in history were not operating on superior information or superior talent. They were operating on a superior installed assumption, one that directed their filtering system toward opportunity, solution, and possibility rather than threat, obstacle, and limitation. And because they noticed more opportunity, they responded to more opportunity. And because they responded to more opportunity, they produced more results that confirmed the original assumption. The cycle is self-generating, which means it can be deliberately initiated. You do not need circumstances to change before you change the instruction. You change the instruction first, and then you hold it consistently, under pressure, without requiring the immediate visible confirmation that would make holding it easy until the filtering system has been sufficiently retrained that the new assumption begins generating its own confirming evidence. This is the operational meaning of acting as if it is already done. Not performance, not pretense. The deliberate installation of a chosen assumption at the level where the RAS receives its instructions, followed by the sustained behavioral commitment that allows the new filter to do its work. The process takes time. It takes consistency. It takes the specific discipline of maintaining the assumption during the period when the old filter is still generating its confirming evidence and the new one has not yet produced enough to feel self-sustaining. That period is the test, and passing it begins with understanding precisely what is being tested, not your circumstances, not your talent, not your worthiness. Your installed assumption. Change the instruction. Hold it long enough for the filter to retrain. And then observe with the clarity of someone who understands the mechanism as the world begins to surface a completely different set of 40 data points from the same 11 million that were always available. The opportunities were always there. You simply were not filtering for them. The RAS cannot filter for a vague direction. This is the critical limitation most people never account for when they wonder why their positive thinking is not producing results. They have attempted to install a new assumption without giving the filtering system a specific enough target to organize around. They have told the brain to look for success without defining what success looks like in sensory, behavioral, measurable terms. The brain is not a motivational system, it is a targeting system. And targeting systems require a precise target. Napoleon Hill called this definiteness of purpose, not a goal, not a vision board, not a collection of things you would like to have or experience. A singular, specific, consuming direction defined with enough precision that the subconscious can recognize it when it appears and begin filtering daily experience for information relevant to its achievement. Here is the functional difference between a vague aspiration and a definite purpose. A vague aspiration, I want to be more successful. I want to build something meaningful. I want financial freedom gives the RAS no actionable filtering criteria. Success has no sensory signature. Meaningful has no behavioral boundary. Financial freedom has no specific form. The brain cannot filter for these because it cannot define what confirming evidence would look like. A definite purpose, specific, measurable, tied to concrete actions and a clear standard, gives the RAS an actual target. Now the brain can begin pulling forward the relevant information, the person who mentions something tangentially connected to your direction, the article that contains a specific piece of applicable knowledge, the opportunity that fits the precise shape of what you are building. These were always in your environment. Without the specific target, they were filtered out as noise. With it, they surface as signal. This is not a minor operational detail. It is the difference between a filtering system that is working for your direction and one that is working at random. The installation of definiteness of purpose is the act of giving your subconscious a clear instruction rather than a vague aspiration. And like all subconscious instructions, it must be delivered with repetition and emotional engagement to achieve the depth of installation that makes it operational rather than theoretical. Every morning, before the noise of the day begins, before the incoming demands and distractions and reactive obligations colonize your attention, you read the one sentence that defines your direction. You feel it as real. You allow your body to respond to it, not as a future possibility, but as a present operational fact. And then you move through the day, from that felt sense, filtering every experience, every conversation, every decision through the lens of the specific direction you have installed. This practice does not require hours, it requires minutes. But it requires those minutes to be treated with the same non-negotiable consistency you would apply to any other input that is genuinely foundational to your functioning. Because it is foundational, in the most literal, neurological sense of that word. The drift that most people experience, the feeling of working hard without clear progress, of moving without arriving, of being busy without building, is almost always the result of operating without a specific enough direction to anchor the filtering system. The antidote is not more effort, it is more precision. Define the direction, install it daily, and allow the RAS to do the work of surfacing the relevant reality that your previous vague aspiration was leaving entirely invisible. The world is full of the information and opportunities you need. You simply need to give your brain a precise enough instruction to find them. There is a specific moment that ends most serious attempts at genuine transformation. Not the beginning. Beginnings are easy. The initial decision carries its own energy. The direction feels clear, the commitment feels real, the obstacles have not yet arrived in their full weight, and the gap between internal commitment and external results has not yet had time to become discouraging. The moment that ends most attempts is somewhere in the middle. When the progress slows without obvious reason, when the silence between actions and results stretches longer than expected, when the gap between the internal assumption you are trying to install and the external reality you are currently living becomes wide enough that the mind starts constructing an argument. A careful, well-evidenced, entirely reasonable-sounding argument that perhaps the direction was wrong, or the timing is off, or a strategic reassessment would be the mature and intelligent response. That argument is almost always a misfiled signal. The people who cannot distinguish between that argument and genuine wisdom are the people who spend their lives in a perpetual cycle of beginning, reaching the middle, retreating, beginning again. They are not failing because they lack capability. They are failing because they are misreading the most important signal in the entire process of transformation. Here is what is actually happening in that middle moment. When you install a new assumption and begin acting from it consistently, you create an immediate conflict with the existing neural architecture. The brain has spent years, sometimes decades, organizing itself around the old assumption. The pathways are deep, the patterns are automatic. The nervous system has calibrated itself to treat the old identity as the baseline state, the default, the thing it returns to when the conscious effort of maintaining the new direction temporarily lapses. That existing architecture does not simply step aside when a new instruction is installed. It generates resistance. The resistance manifests as doubt, as a suddenly sharp awareness of all the evidence that contradicts the new direction, as a feeling that the new assumption is forced, unnatural, perhaps even delusional, a performance you are maintaining without genuine conviction, as the specific fatigue that comes not from physical exertion, but from the sustained cognitive effort of holding a new instruction against the pressure of a well-established old one. Most people interpret this resistance as a signal to stop. It is actually a signal that the rewiring is in progress. This is a documented phenomenon in behavioral change research. The period of maximum resistance typically coincides with the period of most significant underlying change, the phase during which new neural pathways are being constructed while old ones are losing their automatic dominance. The process is not yet visible in results. The new architecture is being built beneath the surface, the underground infrastructure that must exist before anything above ground can be supported. A building does not announce its foundation. The foundation is laid in the invisible before the structure that will rest on it can exist. You cannot see foundation work from the street. But without it, nothing that follows is stable. Your results are the structure. Your installed assumption is the foundation. And foundation work happens underground, in the period that looks from the outside exactly like nothing is happening. Ernest Shackleton demonstrated this principle under conditions that make most modern tests of resolve look comfortable by comparison. When his expedition ship became trapped in Antarctic ice in 1915, when the vessel was slowly being crushed by the ice over months, when every rational assessment of the situation confirmed genuine peril, when the distance between where his men were and any possibility of rescue was measured in hundreds of miles of open ocean in a lifeboat, Shackleton operated from a single installed assumption. Every man returns alive. Not as a hope, not as a prayer, as an operational fact from which every decision was made. He did not maintain this assumption because the evidence supported it. The evidence actively contradicted it. He maintained it because he understood, at some level that predates the modern vocabulary for it, that the assumption was the primary instrument of leadership available to him, that the quality of his installed belief would determine the quality of his men's behavior, that the filtering system running in his mind, and by extension, through his leadership, in the minds of his crew, would determine what possibilities they were capable of noticing in circumstances that looked, from a purely evidence-based perspective, like the absence of any. Every man returned alive, not despite the conditions, not by luck or by miracle, because the assumption was held with sufficient completeness and sufficient duration that it organized every available resource, cognitive, behavioral, relational, toward its own confirmation. That is what the testing phase is for. Not to determine whether your direction is correct, not to provide you with the evidence you would need to justify continuing, to determine whether your assumption is installed at sufficient depth to function when the evidence is absent. Because assumptions that only function when supported by evidence are not installed assumptions. They are conscious choices that require ongoing maintenance. And conscious choices that require ongoing maintenance will eventually lose the competition with the automatic patterns of the established identity. The assumption that survives the testing phase, the one that continues to direct behavior when the results are not yet visible, when the doubt is loudest, when the argument for stopping is most convincing, that assumption has been installed. And installed assumptions generate results with a consistency that maintained intentions never can. When the testing phase arrives for you, and it will, if it has not already, ask one question. Is this evidence that the direction is wrong? Or is this evidence that the rewiring is in progress and the resistance is the architecture's response to being changed? Answer honestly. Then hold the assumption. Keep moving. The foundation is being laid whether you can see it or not. Understanding the mechanism changes nothing by itself. You can have complete intellectual clarity about the RAS and its filtering function. You can understand definiteness of purpose with precision. You can recognize the testing phase for exactly what it is, and still change nothing. Because the gap between understanding a principle and actually living from it is not filled by more understanding. It is filled by the ruthless removal of everything that is structurally incompatible with the identity you have chosen. Not the gradual reduction, not the careful management, the removal. Here is why the removal must be complete rather than managed. Your current identity is not a collection of beliefs held passively in your mind. It is a self-reinforcing system, a network of thoughts, behaviors, environmental triggers, habitual inputs, and relational patterns that continuously regenerate the same self-concept through repetition. Every element of that system is either rebuilding the old identity or constructing the new one. There is no neutral territory. There is no part of your current environment that is simply present without effect. Every morning, you wake up and reach for your phone before you have had a single deliberate thought that is the old system running its maintenance cycle. Every conversation with someone whose primary function in your life is to confirm your limitations, that is the old system feeding itself. Every input that normalizes the assumptions you are trying to replace, every piece of content that reinforces scarcity thinking, every relationship that rewards smallness, every habit that returns you to the old emotional baseline, all of it is the old identity, sustaining itself through your passive cooperation. And it will keep sustaining itself for as long as you allow the conditions that feed it to remain in place. This requires a specific kind of honesty that is genuinely uncomfortable. Not the comfortable honesty of acknowledging that you need to change. The uncomfortable honesty of identifying specifically what in your current daily environment is most actively working against the change. The inputs you are most attached to. The relationships you are most reluctant to distance from. The habits that have the most established neural infrastructure and therefore generate the most resistance when you attempt to interrupt them. Those are the ones that matter most. Begin with your daily information environment. The content you consume, the media, the social inputs, the ambient information that fills the spaces between your deliberate activities is not background. It is instruction. Every piece of content you consume is either training your RAS toward the new assumption or training it back toward the old one. There is no neutral consumption. Audit what is currently occupying the largest portions of your attention. Ask for each one a simple binary question. Does this reinforce the identity I am building or the one I am leaving behind? If the answer is the latter, it goes. Not eventually. Now. This is not about deprivation. It is about the basic operational fact that you cannot retrain a filtering system while continuously feeding it the inputs that maintain the old filter. The attempt to do so is like trying to empty a bathtub while the tap is running. You can work very hard and make no progress because the input rate matches the output rate. Stop the input first. Then address the physical environment. The space you occupy daily is either a forward reinforcement or a backward anchor. Every object associated with the old identity, every spatial arrangement that triggers old patterns, every habitual physical environment that your nervous system has learned to associate with the old emotional baseline, all of it is cueing the old behavior automatically beneath the level of conscious choice. Environmental design is not a lifestyle preference. It is a behavioral lever. James Clear's research on habit formation documented this with precision. The environment is a more reliable behavioral determinant than willpower or motivation because it operates at the automatic level rather than the deliberate one. Change the environment and behavior changes with significantly less conscious effort. Leave the environment unchanged, and every behavioral change requires swimming against the current of automatic environmental cueing. Restructure the space to reflect the identity you are building, not the one you are leaving. Then the most uncomfortable part, address the relational environment. Not all relationships, specifically the ones whose primary function, whether anyone intends it or not, is to confirm the old version of you. The ones where your growth creates visible discomfort in others. Where your new direction is met not necessarily with hostility, but with the subtle, consistent pressure of disbelief, of lowered expectations, of an implicit social contract that you remain recognizable and therefore manageable. These people are not villains. They are simply incompatible inputs for the specific transformation you are attempting. A single, consistent voice in your environment that treats your direction as unlikely, that responds to your actions from the assumption that you will eventually return to the familiar, can dilute the installed assumption more effectively than almost any external obstacle. Because external obstacles engage your resistance. The subtle social pressure of being seen as the old version of yourself operates below resistance. It normalizes. It conditions. It erodes the new assumption quietly, across dozens of small daily interactions until the erosion accumulates into something significant. Protect the installed assumption from this erosion the same way you would protect any other fragile but critical infrastructure during a period of construction. Strategically, without apology. The new identity cannot grow inside the infrastructure of the old one. The clearing is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. The discomfort is the price of actually completing the transformation rather than perpetually approaching it. Every night, without exception, your brain runs a consolidation program. The question is not whether the program runs. It runs. The question is who wrote the instructions currently being executed. For most people, the answer is the day did. The accumulated emotional residue of the day's most charged experiences, the anxieties, the unresolved conflicts, the replayed conversations, the low-level background stress that has become so familiar, it no longer registers as stress, all of it deposited into the subconscious in the final minutes before sleep, and then processed, reinforced, and neurologically deepened across the next 7 or 8 hours. This is not metaphor. It is the documented mechanism of memory consolidation during sleep. During REM sleep, the brain actively processes emotionally significant content, strengthening the neural connections associated with high emotion experiences, integrating new information into existing frameworks, and effectively performing the overnight maintenance of the neural architecture that will determine tomorrow's automatic responses. The emotional charge of an experience is the primary determinant of the depth of its consolidation. Whatever you give your nervous system at the threshold of sleep, it amplifies. This means the final minutes before sleep are not simply a wind-down transition. They are the most neurologically influential minutes of your day. The instruction given in those minutes, the emotional state your nervous system is in as it crosses the threshold into sleep, determines the direction of the overnight consolidation process. And the overnight consolidation process determines, more than any other single factor, the quality of your automatic responses, your default emotional baseline, and the filtering criteria of your RAS as you enter the next day. Most people are spending these minutes in exactly the wrong state. The habitual end-of-day behavior for the majority of people involves passive consumption, the phone scroll that fills the space between the last deliberate activity of the evening and sleep. This input is not neutral. It delivers a stream of emotionally varied, largely low-quality content that provides no direction to the subconscious and leaves the final emotional state before sleep as whatever the last piece of content happened to produce. The subconscious takes that state as instruction. If the last emotional state was mild anxiety, the overnight consolidation deepens anxiety infrastructure. If it was passive distraction, it deepens the neural reward structures associated with distraction. If it was low-grade dissatisfaction, the ambient dissatisfaction that social comparison content reliably produces the subconscious consolidates evidence for dissatisfaction. And you wake up having not rested so much as having run the old program for 8 hours at higher efficiency. The practice that changes this is specific and requires less time than most people expect. In the final 5 minutes before sleep, not the final hour, not after an elaborate preparation sequence, the final 5 minutes you give your subconscious a direct, present tense, emotionally engaged instruction about your installed assumption and your current direction. The neurological distinction between a wish and an assertion matters here. A wish carries the emotional signature of absence, of something desired but not yet present. When you wish for something in the final minutes before sleep, the brain consolidates the neural architecture associated with wanting the gap between current and desired state. You wake up having deepened the experience of the gap rather than narrowing it. An assertion carries the emotional signature of established fact, present tense, already real, already operating. When you assert something in the final minutes before sleep, not as a future aspiration, but as a current operational reality, the brain consolidates the neural architecture associated with its presence. Same words, different emotional signature, completely different neurological effect. So the instruction must be felt, not just spoken. The body must respond to the words as though they are describing current reality. This requires a moment of deliberate emotional construction, the conscious creation of the felt sense of the new assumption being real before the words are spoken. That felt construction, held for even 30 seconds with genuine engagement, is sufficient to establish the emotional signature that directs the consolidation. Speak the instruction quietly. Feel it as real. Let the body settle into the felt sense of the new assumption being operational. The direction is clear. The foundation is being built. Everything required is moving toward me. I wake tomorrow, already aligned with where I am going. Then close the open loops. The brain's Zeigarnik effect, the well-documented neurological tendency to maintain active processing of incomplete tasks, means that every unresolved issue in your life is competing for processing resources during sleep. Unfinished business occupies cognitive bandwidth involuntarily. It intrudes on the consolidation process, divides the overnight processing resources, and results in sleep that does not fully restore. Before the final instruction, write down every open loop, every unresolved issue, unmade decision, incomplete task that your mind is maintaining in active processing. Write it down and write when you will address it. The act of externalizing an open loop, of creating a written record and assigning it a specific future time, is neurologically sufficient to remove it from active processing. The brain accepts the external record as a substitute for internal maintenance. The loop closes, the processing resource is freed. Clear the loops. Give the instruction. Sleep in the direction of where you are going. Do this for 30 consecutive nights without exception. Not because 30 nights rewires everything, because 30 nights of consistent, deliberate instruction begins the measurable shift in the baseline, in the quality of morning clarity, in the frequency of relevant ideas, arriving without being consciously summoned, in the subtle but accumulating evidence that the overnight program has changed direction. The brain has been running on default instructions for years. 30 nights of deliberate redirection will not erase that infrastructure, but it will begin to build a competing one. And competing infrastructures, maintained with consistency, eventually reach a tipping point where the new becomes more automatic than the old. That tipping point is what Napoleon Hill called the installed belief. It is reached through the night workshop, one night at a time. There is a law that does not care how hard you have been working. It does not reward effort for its own sake. It does not compensate struggle or recognize intention or respond to how much the outcome matters to you personally. It operates with complete indifference to everything except one variable: value delivered, consistently, in measurable excess of what the environment expects from you. This is the law of compensation, and stated plainly, without the padding of motivational language, it is this: the man who consistently delivers more value than his environment expects from him will eventually receive more than his environment typically provides to those who only meet the expectation. The word consistently is carrying the critical weight in that sentence. Because this law does not reward individual acts of exceptional performance, it rewards the pattern. The established behavioral expectation of excess value delivery accumulated over sufficient time to become a reputation rather than a single memorable occasion. One exceptional performance surrounded by average ones does not build the reputation the law of compensation rewards. It creates a single impressive data point in an otherwise average data set. The reputation that generates compounding returns, the kind that opens doors without requiring you to knock, that brings opportunity without requiring you to campaign for it, is built by making excess delivery so consistent, so predictable, so structurally embedded in how you operate, that it stops being something people hope to receive from you and becomes something they count on. When your output is predictable at a high standard, something shifts fundamentally in how others relate to you. You stop being assessed and start being trusted. And trust is a completely different currency than admiration. Admiration is what occasional exceptional performance produces. It generates attention, recognition, and the social capital of being considered impressive. These are not worthless, but they are not compounding assets. Admiration that is not converted into trust fades when the impressive performance is not repeated. It requires ongoing exceptional performance to maintain. It is high-maintenance recognition. Trust is what consistent, high-standard performance produces. It is a compounding asset. It accumulates over time into something that operates independently of any single performance, a baseline expectation in others that you will deliver at a standard above what is required, that your word is reliable, that your output is worth paying attention to. Trusted people get chosen, not just noticed. And in every environment where opportunity is distributed, professional, financial, relational, being chosen is the mechanism through which the law of compensation actually delivers its returns. Now, the part that most conversations about this law omit entirely. The returns are nonlinear and delayed. This is the feature of the law of compensation that most people find most difficult to work with because it requires maintaining the standard during an extended period when the immediate feedback does not reflect the accumulated value being built. The referral that arrives 18 months after you delivered exceptional work on a project where the immediate compensation seemed insufficient. The opportunity that comes from someone who observed your standard years ago in a context you have largely forgotten. The door that opens in an environment you were not yet in when the reputation that opened it was being built. These returns cannot be predicted at the time of the input. They cannot be calculated or scheduled. They can only be generated by the consistent maintenance of the standard over a sufficient period of time and then received when they arrive, often from directions you were not monitoring. The man who modulates his standard based on the visible immediate return will never access these delayed compounding returns. Because in every moment when the immediate feedback was insufficient, and there will be many such moments, he will have pulled his standard down to match the apparent return. And each time he does, he removes a data point from the reputation that was building toward the nonlinear return. The man who maintains the standard independent of immediate feedback, who delivers excess value as a function of identity rather than calculation, accumulates these delayed returns continuously, invisibly, until they arrive in concentrated form and appear, to outside observation, as disproportionate success. It is not disproportionate. It is the accumulated return on years of consistent excess delivery, arriving as a function of how reputation and trust compound over time when they are consistently fed. Nick Saban built the most statistically dominant, sustained coaching record in modern American college football history. Not through superior talent identification, every elite program recruits elite talent, but through the installation of a standard of daily practice so consistent, so non-negotiably maintained, that it became the identity of every program he led. His first intervention in each new program was not personnel. It was standard. The establishment of a daily baseline of effort and attention that exceeded what any competing program was doing, and the absolute refusal to allow that baseline to be negotiated down by circumstance, by poor results, by external pressure, or by the players' preferences for comfort. The results did not appear immediately. They appeared after the standard had been maintained long enough to become the team's identity rather than its aspiration. After the players had internalized the excess standard as normal rather than exceptional. After the RAS of every person in that program had been retrained to filter for evidence of that standard being met rather than evidence that it was optional. That is the installation of the law of compensation at the organizational level. Your installation of it is at the individual level, and the mechanism is identical. Identify where you are currently meeting the baseline expectation and calling it sufficient. The role, the relationship, the daily standard where you have quietly accepted the minimum as the standard, because the minimum is what the immediate environment is rewarding. Raise it today, without announcement, without requiring recognition, without calculating the return. Raise it as an identity decision, as the expression of a chosen standard, rather than a response to an incentive. And maintain it with the same consistency you would maintain any other non-negotiable aspect of who you are. The law of compensation will do the rest. It always does, without exception. Every principle covered in this session depends on this one, not philosophically, operationally, as a prerequisite in the most literal, functional sense. Because every mechanism described in this hour, the RAS retraining, the installed assumption, the testing phase, the ruthless clearing, the night workshop, the law of compensation, all of it requires one thing to actually function: a decision, not a consideration, not an intention held with genuine enthusiasm, not a plan developed with real care and commitment. A decision, final, identity level, made at the depth where the subconscious registers it as instruction rather than aspiration, where it stops being something you are trying to do and becomes something you simply are. And here is the uncomfortable truth most frameworks carefully avoid. Most people have never actually made one. They have made intentions and called them decisions. They have made plans and called them commitments. They have had realizations and called them turning points. Each of these feels, in the moment, like the genuine article. Each carries its own temporary energy. Each produces a period of elevated motivation and behavioral change that lasts until the resistance arrives and the intention is revealed through its own collapse to have been something less than a decision. The test that distinguishes a real decision from an intention is this: does holding the commitment require ongoing conscious energy? If you have to continuously remotivate yourself to maintain a commitment, if the commitment requires daily renewal through external inspiration or deliberate willpower, that commitment was made at the intention level. Intentions are held consciously. They are subject to the daily fluctuation of mood, available willpower, and the competing pressure of every other demand on your cognitive resources. They function when the conditions are supportive and deteriorate when they are not. Decisions made at the identity level do not require that maintenance. Consider the commitments in your life that you maintain without effort, the ones so embedded in your self-concept that the idea of abandoning them does not produce a decision point, but simply feels incompatible with who you are. These are identity-level commitments. They were installed through repetition and emotional significance until the subconscious registered them as definitional rather than optional. The goal is to move your chosen direction from the intention layer to the identity layer. And the mechanism for doing that is the same mechanism that built the identity you currently have. Repetition with emotional charge, sustained over time, until the new assumption is more neurologically familiar than the old one, until acting from the new direction feels natural and acting against it feels inconsistent with who you are. But, and this is the part that requires the most honest confrontation, the repetition cannot begin until the decision is actually made. Not intended, made. Here is what a real decision feels like, as distinct from an intention. A real decision produces relief. Not primarily excitement, not the motivational surge that accompanies inspiration. Relief, the specific settling that comes when a question that has been consuming background cognitive energy, the ongoing negotiation between the identity you have been and the one you are choosing to become, is finally resolved by the settlementative nistas of described psoriasis. Clear dominance of one direction over the other. That relief is the subconscious registering the instruction as final rather than provisional. It is the closing of the open loop of identity negotiation. If you finish making a so-called decision and feel primarily excited and motivated, you have made an intention. The excitement is the feeling of a possibility being entertained. If you finish making a decision and feel primarily settled as though something that was previously open and consuming energy has closed, you have made a decision. The settling is the feeling of a question being answered rather than entertained. That distinction is the entire difference between the two. The practical discipline of decisiveness, the trainable quality that Napoleon Hill identified as the common operating characteristic of every person who built lasting results, is the capacity to reach that settled state, deliberately, repeatedly, and increasingly quickly under pressure. It is trained by making decisions and holding them through the resistance that follows. Not by making only the decisions you are certain about. That requires no training. By making decisions in the presence of uncertainty, when the outcome is not guaranteed, when the evidence is incomplete, when the reasonable arguments for waiting are available and genuinely compelling, and then holding those decisions through the testing phase that follows every genuine commitment. Each held decision deepens the neural pathway associated with commitment following through. Each abandoned intention deepens the pathway associated with commitment as temporary. Over time, one of these pathways becomes dominant, and the person whose commitment pathway is dominant experiences decisions not as burdensome obligations requiring ongoing willpower, but as clarifying, as the resolution of the energy-draining open loop of the undecided question and the redirection of all that energy toward execution. This is why decided people appear to operate at a different speed than undecided ones, not because they work harder, because they have stopped dividing themselves between advancing and retreating. All available energy flows in one direction. The accumulation of held decisions over time, each one training the commitment pathway deeper, is what Napoleon Hill called definiteness of purpose expressed through action. Not as a static quality you possess, but as a daily discipline you practice. Make one decision today. Not 10, not a list of areas where you intend to improve. One decision. The specific, final, identity-level commitment that has been sitting at the edge of your awareness, the direction you keep approaching and then softening, the standard you keep meaning to establish as non-negotiable, the identity you keep intending to step into fully and then qualifying at the last moment. Make it now, at the depth that produces relief rather than excitement, at the level where the subconscious registers it as instruction, and then hold it not until it feels comfortable, not until the circumstances improve enough to make holding it easy, but permanently as the expression of who you have decided to be. The relief when the negotiation ends is the sound of an actual decision being made. And from that settled place, from the quiet that follows genuine commitment, every principle covered in this session becomes not a framework to try, but a set of tools available to a mind that has finally decided what it is. Building. This session covered 7 distinct mechanisms, not motivational frameworks. Operational mechanisms, the actual neurological and psychological infrastructure through which your current results are being produced and through which different results can be deliberately installed. The RAS and its filtering function. the installation of a specific enough assumption to give that filter an actionable target. The testing phase and its true identity as the construction period for the new neural architecture, the ruthless environmental clearing that removes the inputs sustaining the old identity. The night workshop and its direct access to the consolidation process that determines tomorrow's automatic responses, the law of compensation and the nonlinear compounding return on consistent excess value delivery, and decisiveness, the prerequisite on which all other mechanisms depend. You now have the complete map, and the map is worth nothing. Not because the map is wrong, because maps do not build anything. The territory is built by people who take the map and move into it, who translate the understanding into action before the window of neurological receptivity that follows. New understanding closes and the habitual patterns reassert their dominance. That window is open right now. The brain is in an elevated state of receptivity. The habitual patterns have been temporarily loosened by sustained attention to new frameworks. The installed assumption of the old identity has less automatic force in this moment than it will have in 6 hours when the familiar environment has reasserted its conditioning and the insight has begun its predictable fade into the archive of things you understood that did not change anything. That fade is not inevitable, but it is the default. The only thing that prevents it is action taken now before the window closes that creates a real-world data point confirming the new direction. Not a plan to act, not a commitment to begin tomorrow. An action-specific, concrete, completable today that is directly incompatible with the old assumption and directly consistent with the new one. One action. Before this session ends, not because one action completes the transformation, because one action converts understanding into evidence. And evidence is what the RAS can filter for. Insight cannot be filtered for. It exists only at the conscious level, where it is subject to the daily erosion of old patterns. Evidence exists in the physical world. The RAS can find it, build on it. Use it as confirmation of the new direction gradually, over time, through the accumulation of more evidence, each piece adding to the foundation of a new assumption that is increasingly self-sustaining. Think without acting and the insight evaporates. Act from the insight and the insight begins to become architecture. So before you move to the next thing, before the prime state closes unused, identify the one action. The specific, concrete, completable today step that makes the new direction real in the physical world rather than only in your understanding of it. Then take it. Not tomorrow, now. And from this moment forward, move like the outcome is already decided. Because the outcome is always already decided by the assumption you choose to operate from. That is not inspiration. That is the law. Now go build something with it.